James, not to toot our own horn, but I feel like the guests we've had on this podcast past few weeks have been on fire. And this week is no different. Welcoming back Eric Seufert, covering everything going on in the digital economy, from open web versus walled garden, the TikTok banning, what's happening over in the EU. And we covered it all. And then outside of the podcast, can you just share a little bit about what we're working on at Market? I think huge announcement that I think you got to share with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't love tooting our own horn, as you put it. But yeah, man, I guess as of publishing this, we'll have Market 2.0 AI live. It is very cool. Obviously, we're biased just given that we're building it, but latest version allows you to talk to all your Shopify and Meta campaigns. And we just launched this thing called targeted chats where you could talk to like individual ads, individual SKUs. It's the coolest thing I've worked on in ad tech. But I think it actually plays really well with a lot of the stuff Seufert's talking about. So if you're someone thinking about building a walled garden or you're advertising across walled gardens, check out withmarket.ai. We'd love to get your feedback. And if you're someone who wants to learn about the future of the walled gardens, listen to this episode of the podcast with Seufert, because the guy has it pretty well mapped out.
So with that, let's get into it. This week, we're excited to welcome back Eric Seufert, who needs no further introduction. Eric, we wanted to welcome you back to talk really about the state of the digital economy and a lot of the topics you've been writing about. And one recently that I think has gotten a lot of people talking is your article about the open web whistling past the graveyard. So maybe that's a good place to start, and just you maybe summarizing what you meant in that article.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me back. It's always interesting when people say, "Oh, you've been writing a lot more lately," because like the output is basically the same and always has been. It just means people are reading it more, and which means it's been better, right? So it's a quality indicator when people think my output has increased. But yeah, so thanks for having me back. So the whistling past the graveyard. So I wrote that at the same time that I wrote another piece that I published a few weeks ago called "Why is Google Killing Cookies?" And I thought at the time that I wrote it, and I planned to release them both like in kind of quick succession. And the reason that I didn't was I thought that the open web whistling past the graveyard piece was a little too provocative, and I wanted to kind of stress test the thesis there by just talking to more people. And so I had an opportunity with South by Southwest being in Austin. I had an opportunity to meet with a lot of people last week and just run this idea by them. Like, do you think people are being realistically pessimistic or appropriately pessimistic about the upcoming deprecation of third-party cookies in Chrome? And everyone I talked to said no, they're not. They are not appreciating the severe impact this is going to have. And so then I kind of felt comfortable releasing that piece. And so the general idea there is, well, it's just that. It's that people do not fully appreciate the sort of what I believe devastating impact that third-party cookie deprecation in Chrome will have. And I think that they don't, because they've sort of subscribed to three reasons for hope, right? Like they've anchored themselves to three reasons for hope, right? The first is that these alternative identity solutions will have enough of a sort of consumer adoption to just replace third-party cookies completely, right? So third-party identity solutions, or these alternative identity solutions, these are things like the Universal ID 2.0. These are things like LiveRamp's Ramp ID. Those are deterministic versions, and there's other like probabilistic versions, like sort of forms of fingerprinting, right? And so, there's a belief, there's a strain of belief within the sort of ecosystem, the digital advertising ecosystem, that look, these will just replace the functionality of third-party cookies. They'll do it almost perfectly, and therefore there will be no utility loss when third-party cookies are deprecated. And I don't think that will be the case. First of all, the alternative ID landscape is very fragmented, right? So you have a lot of them. And so, I don't think probably UID 2.0 certainly is the most well-known of those. But I mean, in a case where you've got like this fragmented market for something that you need to have total ubiquity in, it's just going to create issues around the functionality that it unlocks, right? The second reason is you need to get consumers to opt into this, right? So for a deterministic ID, you need deterministic identity. as a proxy for it, right? Or as a sort of input to it, which is probably email. Are you going to get people opting in wholesale across the internet with their email to sort of have one of these alternative IDs applied to them? Well, if that was the case, why didn't it happen with Safari, right? Apple deprecated third-party cookies completely in 2020, right? Safari has not had third-party cookies since 2020, which means iOS hasn't had third-party cookies since 2020, right? Because all browsers on iOS have to use the WebKit engine. If this was really a solution that was as simple as throwing up a form and saying, hey, we would like to get your email address so that we can, bestow you with this alternative identifier. Why didn't people do it when cookies no longer became possible on iOS, right? Which is the sort of like locus of monetization, right? On the internet. Why didn't that happen? Why would it happen now and not then? Right. And anyway, it's difficult to get people to give an email address. It's difficult to get people to consent. It's difficult to get people to opt in. If consent was very easy, then GDPR would not be problematic, right? From like a monetization standpoint, because everyone would just consent. You say, hey, everyone consents. We'll just drop the consent form and no problem. Right. And then the third reason I think the alternative identifiers are probably not a sort of like a reliable solution here is that you have a matching problem. Right, I talked about this when ATT was rolled out with SK Ad Network. Right, it's different, right? But the idea here is like, if I want to have one of these alternative identifiers sort of replicate the addressability that cookies provide, right? I need you to sort of opt in to the alternative identifier on every publisher site, right? That in order for you to be totally addressable, I would need it to be every publisher site that you visit collects that opt-in from you or collects that email address from you, and therefore those deterministic identifiers can be matched. Well, that's genuinely the issue with the open web, right? It's the volume of publishers that you have, right? So I need every single one of those publishers to get the opt-in in order for the middleman ad tech tool, which is the DSP, to find you, to be able to reach you. Right now, think about something like a walled garden. They don't have that issue because there's one publisher. There's many advertisers, one publisher, right? And this is kind of the issue with the open web generally because you've got many advertisers, many publishers, and then the middlemen trying to connect them, right? But with Facebook, with Snap, with Pinterest, with TikTok, you've got one publisher. That's Facebook, Snap, Pinterest, and TikTok, right? And so you'd have to be able to depend on not only one of these identifiers becoming the dominant one, and maybe that would happen. Maybe this is just a winner-take-all market because of the momentum and the value proposition of having one be ubiquitous. But you'd have to get every single publisher to be able to collect consent, and we know that some publishers probably can do that very easily, and some publishers can't. An MFA website is not going to get it's not going to be able to get the email address to produce a deterministic identifier, right? It's just not going to happen. Whereas the New York Times probably will. Well, guess what? New York Times is becoming a walled garden. They've got their own ad tech. They just announced that they're going to build their own targeting tech that's based on contextual signals. So why would they even want to opt in? They'd rather just go straight to the source, straight to the advertisers, right? And the advertisers would probably do that too because they don't want to lose the rake, right? They don't want to lose the DSP rate. So my sense is, and then on the probabilistic side, I just don't think you're going to be able to depend on IP address, right? Because Google's already introduced tools in the privacy sandbox to hide the IP address. So that's one reason. I mean, there's a multifaceted reason why I don't think alternative identifiers are going to be a perfect solution. The second is that I think people are under like the sort of mistaken belief that the open web is just too big to let fail, right? So that someone will intervene and someone will stop this because you can't just let the open web deteriorate by revoking the sort of keystone of the internet economy, the open web economy, which is the cookie. Well, yes, you can. The open web's not that big. It's 20%, right? It's not that big. Look at app usage over web engagement. Look at time spent. It's all mobile and it's all apps, right? Not all and all, but it's primarily mobile, primarily apps, right? The app ecosystem already won. Right, the vast majority of engagement, the prevailing majority of engagement is in apps, and those are walled gardens. Right, the open web is not that important anymore. No one's going to come to its rescue. And then the last is that people think that Google will just build a privacy sandbox that is as functional, right, that provides as much efficacy as cookies. Why are they incentivized to do that? Right, its network business is in a perpetual state of decline. It's already been eclipsed by YouTube. It's the lowest margin of its businesses, and it's under the microscope by the DOJ in an antitrust suit. They might be forced to divest it. You think they're going to invest all this energy, all this time and money into preserving the efficacy of third-party cookies to support a business that they might have to sell? Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they make it much more sensible to take all of that budget that's flowing into the network business and reroute it to YouTube, to search, right? And collect more margin on it. And the fact of the matter is they don't have to even route all of it. Like, they could preserve their bottom line just by routing like a small proportion of the top line because they get so little margin on the open web. So those are my arguments. Yeah, it did. I ended up putting that behind the paywall because I was a little bit worried that it would. The cookie article blew up. I mean, that was like top of Hacker News, and I'm always a little bit nervous about letting these things run wild because there's usually a lot of pushback just from people that maybe sometimes are incentivized to think differently about it. But anyway, it was behind the paywall, but it still did. That was a very popular article. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's a very pessimistic thesis. But I mean, I just don't know what the counter argument to any of those things is.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I called Daniel after reading it, and I was like, you articulated it a billion times better than I could have, but like, we've been talking about this for years, like tweeting about it and trying to get people to understand that like it is kind of over. Like, the game's kind of already been played to some extent, and I think the way that you articulate about like the open web not being too big to fail, I think is sort of the key. Is just like, in aggregate, it is just not that big. And although it is, I guess, pessimistic to some extent, I don't know if it's a bad thing for like the digital economy. I don't know if it's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing for consumers necessarily. I don't think it's a bad thing for advertisers. And it may be a good thing for creators. It may be a bad thing for publishers, but then those two things may converge over time. But I mean, I guess given that point of view, are there examples out there that you think are going to kind of like buck the trend? And the one that Daniel and I were talking about earlier that we thought maybe just interesting to get your take on, that you've written about as well, is AppLovin. Like, is there an example here where like it's like open app based web is sort of going to be the thing that survives? I just kind of love to get your take on like on where, if anywhere, will like the walled gardens not be able to be totally dominant?
Yeah, good. That's a great question. So I don't remember if it was in a prediction piece. I've been doing prediction pieces for like 8 years or something. I don't remember if it was in a prediction piece. I think maybe I just tweeted it years ago, and I said, I mean, I might be giving myself too much credit here, but I said something along the lines of, I think AppLovin is going to become a walled garden. I think they're going to do that by acquiring an MMP. MMPs are the mobile measurement partners. They're the attribution companies that exist in the mobile app ecosystem. And they did. They bought Adjust, right? I think AppLovin is as close to a walled garden as you can get without only selling O&O, or without O&O being the vast majority of what you sell, and without operating like a scaled social or commerce app. I think that's basically as close as you can get is AppLovin, right? They've got all the components, right? They've got the network, they've got the DSP, they've got the SSP, they've got the measurement tool, and they've got a ton of content, which is their games portfolio and their portfolio of apps, which includes mostly games. So yeah, I mean, AppLovin kind of bucks that trend, but there is no open app ecosystem, right? The app ecosystem is closed because it's operated by Google and it's operated by Apple. And where you've seen regulatory intervention attempts to open it up, it has failed, right? The DMA is not going to make the app ecosystem open. It's just not. You've seen Apple's compliance. I call it performative. I think now allowing I wrote about this, allowing app developers to have their apps be sideloaded, that's going to benefit. So whereas before, I'll take a step back. So Apple, published its, sort of compliance guidance to the DMA. I think 10 developers would have opted into the new business terms that they said were available now to app developers in compliance with the DMA. I think now that app developers can distribute their apps directly via sideload, it'll be 100, right? So it's an order of magnitude greater, but still tiny. Only the very large developers would be able to. First of all, only the large developers enjoy the trust needed to get someone to install, and only the largest developers will be able to sort of like, I think, have enough of gravitas in the user's mind to make that a worthwhile endeavor. Because they also publish the steps that you have to go through to sideload an app, and it's, as you'd expect, it's very cumbersome, right? It's not going to be very easy to do that. So any attempt to make the app ecosystem, and these Apple and Google they're fighting that tooth and nail. I mean, this is existential, right, for them, that they have total control over that. So the app ecosystem just generally isn't open, but within the I don't know, within the benevolence of at the pleasure of the app platforms, you can build walled gardens. I mean, that's what Facebook's done. YouTube, Snap, and AppLovin, I think, has basically as close to a walled garden as you can get. And I mean, you make this point constantly. It was just like they're winning. The walled gardens are winning. Like this is the sort of locus of power within the digital economy, within the digital advertising market. It's walled gardens. That's where all the money flows. And that's especially true post ATT. That's especially going to be true post cookies. That's especially going to be true post GAID on Android. I mean, all of these privacy interventions always benefit the walled gardens. Why? Because they have the closed ecosystem. They can find ways to connect the feedback loop.
And so let's focus then in on the walled gardens, and we're seeing more and more walled gardens pop up, and we'll get to like retail media networks and your thoughts there, and like connected TV, and you've kind of talked about AppLovin on the app side. But with more walled gardens popping up, you've also written about the bifurcation of social media, but within that, kind of I read that as bifurcation of walled gardens. And you wrote about that maybe 6-9 months ago. In your opinion, how is that playing out as a lot of these platforms are investing more on AI, having to invest on the privacy side, having to defend themselves with new technologies? Like, how is that playing out?
Well, it's an it's a balance sheet question, right? Who's got the money to finance these initiatives that are needed to close the feedback loop, right? Or to optimize on the to improve the optimization process on the advertiser side, on the campaign operation side, right? And it's Facebook, it's Google, right? And I talked about this on Ben's podcast last month. Ben Thompson-Stratechery. It's Facebook and Google, and because the absolute cost is the same, whether you're Snap or whether you're Facebook. I mean, to build these AI systems. So there's two things, right? So if you think about what Facebook did to navigate ATT, I mean, they threw the entire kitchen sink at this problem, right? So first of all, they renamed themselves Meta. I think that was more of a public perception thing post Facebook files. But I think it just also was like a PR restart. But they named themselves Meta, but the bigger, and I think that was the headline that distracted a lot of people. But I think that was in a lot of ways like a red herring. What they really did was they broke apart the friend graph to an open graph, right? They shifted the content format, the sort of priority of the content format to short form video, right? And then they invested heavily in Advantage Plus, right? So those are two very separate initiatives, but they support the sort of same cause, right? So let me talk about the shift to Open Graph and short form video first, right? In doing that, they open up the universe of content that can be exposed to a user, right? To anything. So you expand the pool of content for any given user tremendously. And then they shift it into a much more engaging type of content, which is short form video, right? All of that is done to keep you on the app longer, right? So if they keep you in the app longer, they get you engaging with more content and consuming more content. They have more opportunities to show ads to you, right? And so it's actually okay if the ads monetize worse than they did before when you had sort of like more precision with targeting. It's okay because you're showing more of them. It can offset the degradation in CPM because you lost the targeting precision, can be offset with just seeing more ads, with the consumption time going up and seeing more ads, right? And then over time, they can sort of make the targeting better. They can improve the monetization of the ads that they're showing. And so they'll sort of like, they'll move in the positive direction on both vectors. Well, that's exactly what happened for the first time last quarter, right? They talk about, well, our impressions went up and the average cost per ad went up, right? And Mark said in the call that Reels was accretive, right? So it doesn't mean Reels monetizes better than Feed. It doesn't. It still monetizes worse, but there's so many more impressions now that it's okay. It makes up for that. It makes up for that loss, right? So that was a massive undertaking. That they rebuilt the entire product experience, right? Dramatically. I mean, there's foundationally rebuilt the product experience. It used to be closed graph, text, right? Text is super easy to classify. Video is very difficult to classify. So what they have to do, they had to invest heavily in GPUs, right? And they did that really early, right? And so now they've got one of the biggest GPU clusters of any of these big scale social media companies, and they can use that to classify the video content to make sure it's very relevant for you, to make sure you spend more time in the app, and in so doing, you're exposed to more ads, right? Who else can do that? Who else can invest in that way? It's only them. It's only them and Google. Now, on the advertiser side, Advantage Plus. Advantage Plus is not new. People call it AI. It's not. It's just plain old machine learning, right? And it's existed for many years. There was AAA on the app side, automated app ads. That existed in 2021, I think, right? The difference is they took that concept, which is, hey, give us a steering wheel. Let us make all the optimization decisions for you. We can do it faster. We can experiment more thoroughly, more exhaustively. We'll find the winning pairings of audience and creative and placement. We'll do that faster than you can in real time, and we'll do it, 24/7, right? There's no vacation, there's no weekends, there's no after hours, right? So give us the reins. We'll do that. We'll experiment with everything. We'll find you the best pairings of these things very quickly, and so we'll optimize. We'll allow you to deploy your money more efficiently. But what else does it do? It allows them to maximize advertiser spend, right? You're doing that on my behalf. You give me the creative, you give me the ROAS target, right? I decide, and you give me the budget. I decide everything else. Well, guess what? Every single day I'm spending the whole budget. Funny how that happens, right? But I'm hitting a ROAS target, right? So it allows them to use the whole buffalo, to use the low value formats, right? Maybe to invest in Reels when you wouldn't have otherwise. And now they're improving the monetization of Reels, but earlier on, I don't think anybody would have invested there, right? Because it was pretty low value inventory. Now you're going to get as much feed inventory as you need to offset the loss with all the other inventory. We're going to hit your ROAS target, and we're going to spend your whole budget, right? And so those are kind of the two initiatives that they did, which have allowed them to sort of navigate this challenge. Which and also I think there's a misapprehension around cookies. Third-party cookies don't impact the social media platforms at all. They all use first-party cookies, and they have since ITP 2.0 was rolled out, right? So the third-party cookie deprecation is not a roadblock for any of these companies. It's irrelevant, right? But that allowed Facebook and YouTube to navigate the ATT challenge, which sets them up for GAID deprecation, and third-party cookies is totally irrelevant, but costs a lot of money, right? Again, they had to go all in on those, and there's just platforms that can't. And it would cost them the same. It would cost any other platform the same to develop that tech, because it's not, the cost isn't yoked to volume or DAU. It's just yoked to the expense of building this system.
Yeah, it's a thing. We've talked about this a bunch, where like it is this like AI tax almost that
right.
Those like big platforms are basically putting on like the Snaps of the world. It's easy just because obviously like we're biased and homers on Snap, but like to your point, like it's going to cost them just as much to go ahead and change that. And like Evan's talked about this in the latest earnings call. It's like they got to redo all the formats. They got to go through all those steps. And to get back there, I mean, I do think that I think those platforms can catch up, but it's like you're still so far behind. I guess like you're just constantly falling behind on the race.
Well, just on that point, sorry to interrupt, but Evan said, our infrastructure cost per DAO, I think, was something like 80 cents. The global ARPU was $3 something.
Yeah,
I mean that's the cost.
And you see it too, like the R&D spend at these companies. I mean, they're clearly investing in it, but when you look at it as a percentage of revenue or percentage of employee headcount, I mean, it's astronomical. Like you look at it and you're like, this is ridiculous for the size of the company. But your point, like if you're going to compete in the future, you have to make these investments. You have to make it work. But like this is a ton of capital being expended in order to do so.
It's an arms race. I don't know if you read about that. I can't remember who was it from Meta, but they were speaking at the Morgan Stanley TMT conference last week or 2 weeks ago, and they said, we used to have these kind of like very purpose-specific models that we use to classify the Reels content, and we realized like we could treat this like an LLM. Like there's no constraints. Like we're not going to constrain the model in terms of the sort of like specific parameters under which it's used. We're just going to open it up and make it this open-ended like model. So like they basically made this totally like wide breadth neural network, and they just push all the data in. And when you do that, you get surprising results, right? Like you're not trying to optimize to some preconceived notion. You're just saying, look, you tell me, right? It's total black box, right? And what that did was it improved the sort of relevancy and sort of time spent with Reels by like some really meaningful amount. And so that's what you need. And the reason they could do that, the reason they were able to do that was because they had the GPUs, right? You couldn't process that model on just like commodity hardware. You'd push that to the GPUs. And so they're able to do it in a way that was, realistic from like a processing, a time to process standpoint. But like, who's got that access to hardware? There was another quote going around where I think it was like Anthropic or one of these really big AI companies was trying to hire like a senior AI engineer from Meta, and they're like, "Look, this is interesting to me. I'm not a React developer. I have a PhD in this stuff. Like, I've spent a lot of time researching this. This is like my life's work. Are you going to give me access to the resources that I have at Meta?" Right? Like, there's just no way. It's this. I'm not a commodity employee here. Like, this is actually personally satisfying and gratifying to me, and I want to do like the most intellectually stimulating work I can, and that requires hardware and compute.
Yeah. I guess given the, maybe like focusing a little bit on maybe like the state of the tier 2 platforms, given that reality, is that part of the reason why you see this sort of like walled compound thesis coming into play?
Yeah, well, I also just think the walled compound idea makes a lot of sense, right? So with walled compounds, so walled gardens, content fortress was like another concept I had, and the canonical example of that was, hey, Meta took Facebook shops into the product experience. You browse the retailer has to publish their storefront on Meta, and therefore Meta gets direct access to the conversion data, and then close the loop that way. That's a content fortress, right? You're putting big walls around not only the ad tech that's used to serve the ads and the inventory that you have because you own it because you're a walled garden, but also the conversion data that gets emitted. You're bringing that inside the wall. So walled compound is a little bit different. You're taking a set of those and you're bringing them together in the wall, and you're allowing them to share data because the walls are around it, right? And so the canonical example of that would be the Amazon partnership that was announced or revealed. It was kind of like leaked almost with Facebook and Snap. And so the way that works is that Amazon will allow its advertisers to buy inventory on Facebook, right? So an impression becomes available on Facebook. One of the Amazon retailers gets the opportunity to buy it. Now, the first time a user sees this, it'll just be like a generic ad, right? It'll just say there's some products available on Amazon. But it'll also ask you if you want to connect your account. Now, if you connect your Meta account with your Amazon account, now Amazon gets to bring to bear all of the purchase history data it has on you because it knows who you are because you connected your accounts, and then pick the right ad for the right product the next time an impression becomes available to show you that's like the likeliest to convert, right? And what they say when, what this dialogue box says when it asks you to collect accounts is, Facebook will not get your purchase history from Amazon. Well, then how could that work? Well, because Amazon picks the ad. They pick the product. They decide which ad to show you. They concoct the ad. They generate the ad. They send it over to Facebook, and they say, hey, here's the ad I want you to show this user. This is the one I've determined is the likeliest to convert. And here's some sort of quantified notion of value, right? So they give them something to insert into the auction that gives them a sense of expected value, right? That is unprecedented. Facebook exerts tight control over the feed, right? They need to. That could affect retention. That could affect churn. They're letting Amazon do that, right? They're not connecting the data sets. They each still have their independent data sets, but there's a product flow between them, right, that utilizes both sets of data, right? Now, Facebook takes the ad, puts in the feed, user clicks, they check out in the app. They don't have to navigate out. My understanding is Facebook doesn't get the conversion at that point. This is not Facebook shops. This is just them checking out on Amazon, right? And my belief would be Amazon passes the conversion signal back via CAPI, right? Which would be anonymized, but have IP address, right? And so that's the conversion loop. So what you're doing really in this sense is you're not getting any better measurements and therefore any better targeting as a result of this partnership because it's still, it's still audited via CAPI, but you're getting more relevant ads because Amazon gets to take its data, create the ad, then just send the ad over. They're not sending the data over. They're sending the ad over. So everyone's kind of going to give something up, right? Amazon's got to give up the ads opportunity, right? And then Facebook's got to give up control over the feed. But everyone gets something in return, right? Facebook gets more ads, more demand into its auction, so that should drive prices up. Amazon gives more surface area for its advertisers to drive sales on Amazon, right? And they both attack TikTok.
So with that, I mean, do you see that start to take form with more tier twos and threes as they're trying to compete, and you start to see Amazon and Facebook and Google and some of the large tier ones start to exert that control and start to pressure tier twos into a relationship like that?
Yeah, I think so. So what does Amazon not have? They don't have social, right? I mean, that's the one thing they don't have. They've tried and it's failed. And they're all kind of scared of TikTok. I don't think this ban's going to go through. I don't think this passes the Senate. I don't. I just there's no way. But so TikTok's here to stay, I think. And so yeah, I do. So first of all, it's interesting because the Pinterest deal with Amazon predates the one with Facebook and Snap, and I'm guessing it was successful, right? And Pinterest even said that, like, because it's just driving more ads into the search results, right? Which is going to increase the uptake in the ads. And then Pinterest announced the Google deal. I mean, I think Pinterest got to do deals with everybody. The interesting thing about Pinterest is I wrote this piece a while back called "The Promise of Pinterest." And I think Pinterest really does have a unique differentiation that has a lot of value relative to other sort of like pure play social, because there is already baked in intent. Like if you're using Pinterest, you're trying to find stuff to buy, right? So all they really need to do is pair your interest with the right ad. The problem is, I mean, they're playing catch up. I mean, they neglected that ads platform to such an incredible degree that, Bill Reddy coming in, I mean, I think he's probably the right person for the job, but there's a lot to do. And so they're just having there's a timeline that they're executing against. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of investment, right? And I think they're doing all the right things. It's just like they're really far behind. So Pinterest, I would say, has probably a sort of innate advantage over the other pure play display channels because there's no intent. I mean, using Facebook, there's no intent, right? Snap, no intent. YouTube, very little intent. And so I think Pinterest does have that kind of natural advantage. But yeah, I mean, I think Snap. I mean, what I would say about Snap is I feel like if anybody can bring a high engagement new use case to market, it's Evan Spiegel, right? And so I feel like I wouldn't bet against them for that reason. I think that now there's no like, I don't think there's like an M&A play here because I don't think he would sell. I mean, he's got controlling voting power. But I could see Snap, and maybe it's like an outside, it's sort of a long shot, but I could see Snap bringing a new sort of engagement model to market that dramatically changes its fortunes. I could see that happening.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm biased, but like two things. One is I agree he's never going to sell. And two is there's really not, outside of TikTok, there's not been someone that has built a consumer product to this scale, right, other than what Evan's done. And he's been right on almost every major theme. And pre-ATT, the ads business was working. Yeah. And so I think to your point though, like, changing directions on these, massive businesses when you are competing against $1 trillion market cap businesses, just hard. I do think, one thing about the walled compounds thing that it got me thinking about is that, like, back to almost your original conversation about open web, it's like, open web in theory is really nice because it just makes it easier on the demand side, right? Like I can buy stuff everywhere. And, the walled compounds thing is kind of a good example of like, you can have cross-channel ad buying in like a pretty logical way, even if it's not through the traditional open web, right? It's like, as these compounds all link together. So I think that's got to be like the future. And my assumption is just like, just going to see more and more of these. I don't know. Do you have a point of view of that? Like how that would spread to maybe like the RMN space? Like how is that going to kind of consolidate, just given just all the different ad networks that have been popping up?
Yeah, RMNs, CTV. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. I think what it ends up empowering that is just trusted TEEs, trusted execution environments, right? So you get some sort of like privacy enhancing, essentially like nexus of data, right? So you've got this company that sort of like makes its tech auditable, or it's just sort of like allows it maybe even has like a some sort of like transparency into how it operates, and they just sit between all the players, right? So all of the RMNs and all the CTV, they push their data into this company's like data environment. All the advertisers push their data in this data environment, and then this all gets sort of linked together with attribution, and then the sort of like winners get notified, right? My sense is that's probably what empowers that part of the ecosystem going forward, and even partly the walled gardens, right? Like you want to have sort of your demands applied elsewhere. Like, well, you'll need some sort of tool like that to manage the attribution. And one form that these take now is data clean rooms. I'm not sure that those are like sufficiently private, but I feel like you'll get like a next generation of these that maybe like have some sort of like vetability or auditability that are seen to be like truly privacy preserving, and that enables the flow of data, just not the free flow of data, right? It enables the utilization of data without the free flow of data in ways that can be used for nefarious purposes. Like if you look at cookies, I mean, they are a privacy nightmare. I mean, cookies are a privacy nightmare, and that's what allows a lot of the data brokerages to even exist, right? I mean, that's the slimy, bottom-feeding stuff, and it shouldn't exist, I don't think. And so the consumers should have an expectation of privacy. They should have an expectation that some company that they've never heard of, can't get access to their data because they visited a website, or it's not conscionable, I don't think, and it shouldn't exist. And so my sense is like everyone's really incentivized to work towards that future. The question is, are there competitive reasons to not want to allow that? And I think the platforms are the ones that face the most, the most sort of like downside risk with that future taking shape. And so they'll probably be the ones that oppose it most vigorously.
On that point, you I think maybe tweeted it today or tweeted it a few days ago, but over in the EU, we're starting to see the Facebook's pay or okay kind of mantra, and the EU starting to enforce or trying to enforce ad personalization and feed personalization, and try to pull back that. Obviously, they're targeting big tech, but do you see one like that actually taking hold and this pay or okay model actually sustaining? And then two, like how does that start to like what's the waterfall effect across all of these tier 2, tier 3 new platforms that are building a business around that type of personalization? But if it gets ripped away, who knows?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the kind of headline here is that the EU is 10% of the digital market, right? I mean, it's 500 million people, and they always talk about that, but it's 10% of the digital market. So, look, if you can't personalize, it's all brand ads. What's the haircut on that? I mean, I don't know, 6% of the 10, but so 60% maybe. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that this activist strain in the EU has gathered so much power, right? Because if you look at Norway they banned personalized advertising by Facebook, right? They did that last year, and so first of all, Norway's not in the EU, but they are a member of the EDPB. They're just non-voting, right? So the EDPB is like the privacy legislature in Europe that enforces the GDPR. Norway. But like the two largest parties in Norway released a joint statement the year before. So we intend to ban personalized advertising in Norway. I mean, so this is like they're open about this. I mean, and this is not like I don't believe this is like informed by any sort of like clear, demonstrable sense of harm. This is they don't like it, right? That's activism. Right, that's not what I would consider to be like responsible policy, work. That's activism, and so and then Norway bans it in Norway, and then they appeal to the EDPB to apply that ban, absent consent, across the entirety of the EU, and the EDPB said, okay, sure, we should do that. They don't vote. They don't have a vote, and so it clearly is a desire by the sort of call it the privacy apparatus in the EU to just ban personalized advertising, right? The problem is it's the argument now is totally inconsistent and hypocritical because they scrutinize PayerOK. The largest German newspapers use PayerOK and have for years. And that was scrutinized and deemed to be consistent with the GDPR and lawful under the GDPR. Now they're saying, well, no, but Facebook can't do it. Well, why? Well, because they hate big tech. They hate American big tech. I don't want to say hate. That's stupid. That's not a responsible thing to say. But they are very hostile to big tech. And they're very hostile to American big tech. Right? And they don't want it operating in that way. They don't want that model to be used there. And you know what? Hey, fair game, right? Sure, do it. But, I mean, it doesn't just impact American firms, right? It impacts all firms, right? And one thing I would say is that they actually, I mean, I've said, they're trying to target American firms. I don't think they're trying to target American firms because they're American. I think they're trying to target American firms because the American firms are the biggest in the world, right? The biggest and the most successful in the world. I don't think they have any specific issue with U.S. firms. I don't think it's necessarily like a geopolitical tension. I think it's just a big is bad mentality. And they have actually prosecuted a lot of like homegrown heroes, right? Criteo, Voodoo Games, like they've brought cases against a lot of European domiciled firms. So at least you can say like their ideology here is pure. I don't, they apply, and I think they apply it pretty evenly. It's just I disagree with it wholeheartedly.
Before we wrap, just on ideology and regulation, you mentioned TikTok a little bit ago, and I've been following it closely, and I think been pretty vocal about what I think. But like, what's your kind of take on like state of play? I don't know if you have any thoughts in particular on the bill itself, but yeah, what's kind of your overall thoughts on it?
My sense is these are, I hope, like objective observations, right? But it's going to be tough to get anything done in the Senate that Trump doesn't approve of. And Trump has said that he doesn't approve of the TikTok ban. He thinks Facebook, for whatever reason, is the bigger enemy. Trump doesn't want to have the TikTok deal happen. It's not going to happen. Or the TikTok ban happen. It's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to get through the Senate. And I think it was able to get through the House because everyone knew it's not going to get through the Senate. And so my sense is that's not going to go anywhere. Look, my preference would be rather than a targeted ban, and I said this when Trump wanted to ban TikTok, the first, during his administration, like if you're going to ban it or you're going to force a divestiture on the basis of data sharing, I'd much rather you implement a federal privacy law. That's the better way to do this, right? That's the superior way to do this. Now, the thing is with TikTok, it's not just data sharing. It's also like algorithmic manipulation. I happen to support the forced divestiture ban. I support that. I think that should happen. I don't think it will, but I think it should. But yeah, if the data privacy is the primary concern, well, then why don't you pass a federal privacy law? Because you know what? We've got 12 state level privacy laws right now. We're going to have 50 at some point. No one can navigate that, right? That is chaos, right? I'd much rather have a comprehensive federal privacy law that is clear and is consistent, right? Rather than navigate at some point 50 state level privacy laws, right? That are all kind of the same. They all sort of hew to the GDPR. They're all kind of the same, but they all differ in idiosyncratic ways. And that's a nightmare to try to navigate. So my sense is TikTok's here to stay. I don't think this will get through the Senate. But I do support. I do think there's reason for grave concern with TikTok. And the other thing is now, the CEO is making the argument that like we could never divest it because it was just structurally impossible. Wasn't he on the stand in the congressional hearing saying, no, we've segmented all the data. This already operates as if it's an independent entity. It's with Project Texas. That was the whole point. He talked about many times billions and billions and billions invested into this. So shouldn't they just be able to flip the switch? Shouldn't they just be able to hand the keys over to the data centers that are based in the U.S.? I don't understand why that's a technical challenge.
Yeah, I think talk to any former employee there and they'll tell you what they think. I think in most cases, off the record, and it is not as clean as they make it seem. But I guess on the federal privacy law side, is there any movement there at all? Like, are you familiar? Are there any politicians who are taking this up really kind of seriously at this point, or not really?
No, it's just not. It's a political loser. It's not popular. It's just not as pressing as kind of anything else. I don't see much hope that that'll ever happen. But hopefully I'm proved to be incorrect about that. But I see certainly no movement right now.
Yeah, I mean, It's a little crazy if states continue to just have their own kind of form of these laws. I would imagine at some point, big tech gets tired of retrofitting this state by state and maybe puts a lobby against it. I don't know, to like do it at the federal.
Well, but no, I would imagine that big tech. I mean, they say they do want it, but I would imagine that they don't because big tech, who else can navigate this? Who else can institute the policies? Who's got the army of lawyers? This just benefits the biggest tech companies. Like, hey, you can't go out on your own because there's no way you can comply with 12 different, even just 12 is difficult. There's no way you could understand the nuances of 12 different state level privacy laws. You got to sell with us or work with us because we're the only ones that can build the infrastructure to navigate that properly without introducing any liability.
Yeah, that's a great take. And I'm awaiting when you have some paid content kind of discussing this. I'd eat that up real fast. But I think as we close out and let you go, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. But we covered a lot of, I think, what is typically your paid content. I think people interested in these topics probably should subscribe because your content comes out a lot and it's very in depth. So where can people learn more and subscribe?
Yeah, mobiledevmemo.com. It's $8.99 a month. It comes with access to the content, but it also comes with access to a tool that I released recently called Darkpool. So Darkpool is a mobile app store chart explorer, right? So what you can do is you can just kind of click some filters and see what the top charts are across Android and iOS. That's fairly generic functionality. A lot of companies offer that. What Darkpool offers that is not offered by any other app intelligence company is you can do SQL-like searches. Right. And so you could say, hey, what apps jumped the most in terms of ranks with their average ranking 2 weeks ago to their average ranking last week? Show me across iOS and the App Store. Show me across every single geo. And you'll get a list of all the apps and, to show the ranks over the last 90 days. And you can graph it. Right. I think that's pretty unique functionality. I use it all the time. I built this for me. Maybe that's a problem because you have to do SQL style searches. You can't navigate the data any other way. But I think it's pretty cool. You can download the graphs, you can share them. And I think it provides like a lot of insight into like which categories are growing, which apps are growing. It's how I discovered actually that a lot of these fast food apps were surging up the ranks every single football Sunday. And I thought to myself, well, why is that happening? Why isn't it just DoorDash? Right. Well, it turns out that they've all disintermediated DoorDash and Uber Eats. And what these companies have done now is they've offered like white label service. Well, why would you want to do that? Isn't it more convenient to work with DoorDash, Uber Eats? No, it is. Yes. But you get the email address.
Yeah. It's like the classic, everything's, they're all these little walled gardens. And that tool is awesome. And when you were like, I think there was a period of time where you were tweeting about basically like X on that, like that run up when they went. It was like, it was impressive how quickly you could call bullshit on what the growth story was there. Well, yeah, man, like I said, we all subscribe to it. And I can't tell you the number of people who've hit me up, like asking about like your latest post on it. So I know, like you said, the frequency has been the same, but I don't know, it's a kind of a must read at this point. So thanks for doing it, man. And thank you for taking the time to come do this. I know you got a bunch going on, but thanks. We'll share it out and we'll put links to it and hopefully everyone subscribes to it.
Cheers, guys. Had a great time. Happy to come on anytime. I love talking to you guys.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Take care.